The trappings of a tabloid cover love affair must come with extravagant expressions of affection, expensive gifts, and actions brought on by the deep emotions only people who don't work desk jobs for a living can know. Imagine my disappointment when I realized that celebrities don't love differently than regular people. Even worse, the toxic boyfriend that John Mayer is purported to be is pedestrian and mundane. His purported efforts of manipulation and control in his relationships reflect experiences I've heard from many girlfriends and experienced myself with average working class men. Making a partner feel dumb to prop up his own self-image, using sporadic breakups and reconnections to maintain control, dominating conversations to suppress his partner's expression, going to his ex-partner's family to retain a foothold in that partner's life. After a final breakup, publicly insulting his ex-partner as professional revenge. I've read Jessica Simpson's memoir, read Taylor Swift's song lyrics, and John's interviews. It never ceases to amaze me how known a person's toxic behavior can be, and yet they're still not held accountable for their actions. I'm a person who's been discussing Britney Spears' conservatorship with her friends for years and John Mayer's toxic behavior for months. So when John Mayer spoke about Britney Spears and the internet responded by calling him out, I decided it was time for me to connect the dots for whoever's interested. This may surprise you, but I find it meaningless to deep dive into who John Mayer is or what made him any sort of way. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts and recently realized that there's an absurd amount of time that's dedicated to attempting to uncover what made them do it. There's no secret magic event that makes anyone any sort of a way. Hearing what a bad guy's childhood neighbor thought of them doesn't explain why they harm people. It only glorifies and glamorizes that bad guy. So instead of picking apart his childhood and early career, I'm going to recap necessary points. John Mayer was born in 1977, which will make him 44 in October of 2021. He enrolled at Berklee College of Music for a bit before disenrolling and moving to Atlanta to start his music career. He eventually signed with Columbia Records in 2001. In 2002, his first album spawned 3 radio hits, including Your Body is a Wonderland. His second studio album, Heavier Things, debuted #1 on the US Billboard 200 in September of 2003. John Mayer continued to grow his fame successfully through 2010, wherein he gave 2 interviews that we'll talk about later. He then withdrew from the public eye until 2012, when he launched another album. He has since continued to release music and has toured with The Dead & Company, a band made of some Grateful Dead members and him. He's well regarded as an exceptional guitarist. If you're a fan of John Mayer and have watched to this point, I acknowledge that the man is good at the guitar. I had a friend who was obsessed with John Mayer, and I always struggled to express that I don't care how good the artistry is. Being a savant doesn't excuse you from your obligation to uphold common decency. Learning about Stanley Kubrick's traumatization of Shelley Duvall while filming The Shining makes me never want to watch another Kubrick again. I don't care about the outcome of the art if the method of making it is inhumane. I think women are people, and that the way people treat other people is indicative of their character. The knowledge of the quality of a person's character influences my interpretation and enjoyment of their work. Anyways, those are the basic points about John Mayer that are important for understanding his role in the rest of this video. He's a famous, commercially successful musician. What I care about more than uncovering the details of his life is the impact he's had on his partners. So it's time to talk about one of those people, what he purportedly did to them, and the understanding we can conclude from his patterns of behavior. Jessica Simpson's memoir, Open Book, is the catalyst for this video. My favorite podcast, You're Wrong About, ran a series where the hosts deep dove into the book. This is a podcast that usually breaks down cultural myths on serious topics like child trafficking, the exploding Ford Pinto, and Terry Schiavo. When they said they were going to talk about Jessica Simpson's book, I probably audibly groaned. I've never been into Jessica Simpson's music or cultural narrative, but when they began discussing her toxic relationship with John Mayer, I was flabbergasted. I suddenly felt like I knew Jessica Simpson. I really enjoyed this book and recommend it to anyone who loves aughts, pop culture nostalgia. Jessica Simpson was born in 1980, making her 41 in July 2021. She signed with Columbia Records in 1997 at the age of 17. Her debut album premiered the same year as Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera's albums. All three of these starlets met back in auditions for the Mickey Mouse Club back in 1992. The press identified Jessica's differentiator was that she was saving herself for marriage, and this theme of abstinence and purity followed Jessica for press junctions through her marriage to Nick Lachey in 2002. Jessica and Nick's divorce was finalized in 2006. Before the divorce, John Mayer had already entered the picture. Both Jessica and John were signed to Columbia Records until Jessica left the label in 2006. They met at a party in February 2005 where John complimented Jessica on a song she wrote. Because they were both Columbia artists, she claimed he would randomly show up at events like her album release party. At that album release party, she was still married to Nick Lachey, and Nick called out the strangeness of John's presence, asking her why he was there. According to Jessica, John immediately started writing her. His notes quickly became more intimate, and he told me he saw something in me that no one else did. He asked why I would want to just be famous as a wife. He said I was so much more than the world perceived me to be. This passage raises John Mayer's first 3 red flags, and Jessica wasn't even divorced yet. For identifying and discussing toxic behaviors are the red flags I'm going to signal. I'm referencing Lundy Bancroft's Why Does He Do That? Bancroft is a counselor who has worked with voluntary patients and court-mandated abusive men. I recommend this book to nearly everyone who expresses a past relationship trauma to me because it makes the world make more sense. This book demystifies the reasoning behind abusive relationships. That being said, I'm not calling John Mayer abusive. Bancroft explains that abuse is about power. It means that a person is taking advantage of a power imbalance to exploit or control someone else. While I'm going to point out patterns of toxic behavior that Bancroft explains in his book, there's no evidence of John taking advantage of his power over Jessica or anyone else for personal gain outside of the relationship. The point of discussing these behaviors is to establish a pattern that can be compared to examples from other relationships John had. I see value in challenging whether or not Jessica is a reliable narrator, and if you have that skepticism, I value what you're bringing to the table. That skepticism is why I bring in outside examples of John's behavior, like his interviews and ex's testimonies from other relationships. There's a phrase that I like to employ for understanding interpersonal conflict, and it's that no two people are in the same relationship. Person A has a relationship to person B. Person B has a relationship to person A. What that relationship means to either person and how they feel about one another is different. While you can sit down and write facts about what day they met or agreed upon a title for their relationship, only the individuals in the relationship can know what they felt when, or what the title means to them. We are relying on Jessica's interpretation of her experience in the relationship. Instead of taking Jessica's word as fact, I propose examining instances and questioning if they're plausible, consistent with the presented narrative of this relationship, consistent with his and her other relationships, and consistent with your personal understanding of relationships. All of these first 3 red flags will be recurring themes in this relationship. Red flag number 1. His notes quickly became more intimate. The first red flag is boundary violation. This isn't something Bancroft goes into deeply in specific terms, but in general, boundaries are restrictions put in place to respect the physical and emotional well-being of all parties. If the separation of church and state is the freedom from religion, then boundaries are the freedom from responsibilities for others' emotions and actions. Jessica was a married person when John Mayer initiated contact. Regardless of Jessica's previous behaviors and actions, John is violating the social norm to respect the emotional unavailability of married persons. He's also violating the social norm of not initiating more contact than is appropriate for their level of friendship. If you're thinking to yourself, well, if no one ever escalates their relationship with anyone, you'll never have friends, you're definitely right. Someone has to push communication in order for a relationship to flourish. In this instance, John saw a married woman and explored an emotionally charged exchange with her. Jessica was struggling in her marriage and vulnerable. Even though they had only ever exchanged niceties at a party, John emotionally engaged with her. Some people may see this as romantic, like he just knew that he had to reach out to her because he was so attracted to her. You could also see this as disrespectful to her commitment to her relationship and disrespectful to her freedom from responsibility for his attraction. Boundaries exist to protect both parties. Red flag number 2. The second red flag is rushing intimacy. In my experience, rushing intimacy is a pretty common tactic in digitally mediated relationships. Instead of a relationship developing gradually, giving both parties ample opportunity to share themselves according to their comfort levels, one person divulges personal information before the other person has signaled that they are ready for that type of relationship. Person A presents something emotionally charged beyond the expected or previously established norm of acceptable in the relationship. This throws off person B, who wasn't in a position where they expected this level of emotional contact. This shock startles and therefore deprives person B the opportunity to process what's happening and how they feel. Instead of a gradual increase in mutual trust, person A took the relationship from 0 to 100, without giving person B the opportunity to decide whether or not they're comfortable with that escalation. While you may think this would be a turnoff, if person B had previously been in a relationship where their partner wasn't vulnerable or couldn't easily share their feelings, they may interpret this as attractive. Usually, the pace of emotional exchange in a relationship is a negotiation where each partner moves the pace along by divulging when they're comfortable. Rushing intimacy deprives the agency of the recipient and gives the divulger the unilateral power to decide how far the relationship is. Rejecting the inappropriate advancement of the relationship may mean the recipient risking losing that relationship. And now that relationship seems to suddenly be very serious, with the divulger more invested than the recipient. There is suddenly pressure on the recipient to play catch-up and get on the same level or lose the potential partner. Once again, isn't this just how relationships move forward? On its own, this may not be an indicator of a problem. In the context of other behaviors, this could establish a toxic pattern. Red flag number 3. He told me he saw something in me that no one else did. He said I was so much more than what the world perceived me to be. The third red flag was propping Jessica on a pedestal. According to Bancroft, disrespect can take the form of idealizing you and putting you on a pedestal as a perfect woman or goddess, perhaps treating you like a piece of fine china. The man who worships you in this way is not seeing you, he is seeing his fantasy, and when you fail to live up to that image, he may turn nasty. So there may not be much difference between the man who talks down to you and the man who elevates you. Both are displaying a failure to respect you as a real human being and bode ill. While Bancroft uses he pronouns to refer to manipulators, these also could be carried out by she's and they's. It's just that in the context of this book, Bancroft chooses to use he pronouns as his experience is largely with male manipulators. The idea that John could see more in Jessica than no one else did presupposes that John knows what everyone else sees in her. This is a man who met her once at a party and showed up to an album release party, not a man who has spent time with her personally, time with her family, time with friends. This also insinuates that John sees Jessica to be something different than she sees herself. In the book, she admits that during this time, she was going through an identity crisis, as you can kind of expect a person may when they divorce their teenage sweetheart. But still, don't you think Jessica Simpson has a better grasp on who she is than someone she's never spent one-on-one time with? Once the divorce was finalized and John and Jessica began secretly dating, he purportedly would tell her again and again, he was obsessed with me, sexually and emotionally. The combination of placing her on a pedestal and telling her that only he knew the person she could be leaves little space or grace for her to be the herself that she wanted to be. There's a popular saying in the dating advice community that you can't date potential. The idea is that when you are with someone, you have to recognize who they actually are in order to respect them. Otherwise, you're placing an unfair expectation on them. When you're dating someone, you are dating them, not the version of them that they may become in 5 years. This also reminds me of a technique called triangulation. Triangulation is the introduction of a specter of a third person in a relationship, either imagined or real. If a boyfriend's girlfriend suddenly starts raving about her coworker and how funny he is, the boyfriend might become uneasy in their relationship or lose self-esteem by the inherent comparison that this third person is providing something that he can't, that he wants to fulfill for his girlfriend. This becomes triangulation when the girlfriend uses comparisons to her work husband to manipulate her boyfriend into changing his behavior for her benefit. Like I said, the third person could also be imagined, like the idealized version of Jessica Simpson in the relationship between John and Jessica. Because John has a fantasy of the relationship he could have with his idealized Jessica, the real Jessica feels as though she's in competition with this specter for John's affection. The real Jessica gets up and lives every day, and she has hopes, fears, feelings, and dreams unique to her. Instead of being accepted for her strengths and shortcomings, Jessica found herself trying to live up to John's fantasy of her. Red flag number 4. I almost left this one out because it's the hardest to explain, but it's also perhaps the most influential recurring flag according to Jessica's account of the relationship. John defined reality. I constantly worried that I wasn't smart enough for him. He was so clever and treated conversation like a friendly competition that he had to win. John would regularly monologue, jumping from topic to topic. When I tried to leap back in and say something to add to the dialogue he was having with himself, he would challenge what I said. Sometimes he wouldn't let go of questioning why I thought a certain way until it had me second-guessing myself. Bancroft has a special character model for this type of tactic, and he's called Mr. Right. Mr. Wright's tone of authority can cause his partner to doubt her own judgment and come to see herself as not very bright. Mr. Wright wants his partner to doubt her mental abilities in this way so he can control her better. If this is the angle John was unknowingly or knowingly working with Jessica, which is consistent with descriptions of their exchanges, this is particularly nefarious because Jessica already had been self-conscious of her intelligence starting at a young age. A passage that really struck a nerve with me is that while Jessica is a prolific journaler, she only journals in pencil. This is because she may find spelling or grammatical errors, and the best way to correct it is by going back and erasing and rewriting her entries. She does this in case she dies and someone goes through her journals. They won't think she's dumb. That's how deeply ingrained this fear is for her. You may know Jessica Simpson for some of her ditzy moments. She went viral for asking her ex-husband if chicken of the sea is chicken or fish. She was 23 when she made that statement, and I know plenty of thoughtful, kind people who would have made a similar nonsense statement at that age. She went on to say other graceless things like complimenting the Secretary of the Interior on the interior design of the White House at a White House event. Jessica is aware of how the media presents her intelligence, and it's a recurring theme in the book. There was a scene where she described going to a bookstore and picking up a small stack of books, only for the cashier to tell her, "No offense, but you look like the smart version of Jessica Simpson." This compliment uplifted her enough to get into her memoir. If John acted like a Mr. Right in this relationship, where his word was the end-all be-all of logic in every arena, it would be easy to assume that he would want to look for a partner to challenge him on equal footing. But instead, he chose to pursue a woman who was already self-conscious about her intelligence. When she spoke about her faith, he would challenge her on what she believed. According to Jessica, her steadfastness in her faith was one of the few things in life he couldn't quite figure out. Because we don't get a play-by-play of their conversations or fights throughout their relationship, I find myself having to read her discomfort in reaction to his actions in order to figure out what could have been going on. This phrase, that her faith was one of the few things in life he couldn't quite figure out, is peculiar in the sense that Jessica is implying that someone thinks John Mayer has everything in life figured out. This directly lines up with the description of Mr. Right. Besides knowing all about the world, Mr. Right is also an expert on your life and how you should live it. He has the answers to your conflicts at work, how you should spend your time. He is especially knowledgeable about your faults, and he likes to inventory what's wrong with you, as if tearing you down were a way to improve you. At this point, Jessica admits that she developed a habit of asking people who are not dating John how to date John. This manifests by her asking her friends to proofread texts or emails she's going to send him, or help her decipher a message he sent her. Her self-confidence was so low from always being wrong to his Mr. Right that she obsessed over conducting her interactions with him. Red flag number 5. I don't know how else to describe this red flag other than arbitrary relationship games. After Jessica started seeing John, he expressed an interest in her not seeing anyone else. So she didn't see anyone else. But they weren't publicly together. She had just had a very high-profile divorce and was a media sweetheart. This was 2006, a year before Britney Spears shaved her head, and the paparazzi followed Jessica everywhere. John wanted to keep the relationship secret. It kind of made sense because of the divorce and the tabloids. If I were Jessica Simpson and freshly involved with John Mayer, it's plausible that I would think those things make sense. But here's the thing. When the news broke that they were together, John broke up with her over email. Jessica describes his response as he felt his artistic integrity was in jeopardy. He posted "The Public Enemies Don't Believe the Hype" on his blog in response to the headline. Jessica says she was humiliated. This is so incredibly cruel because his actions demeaned Jessica Simpson, threw into question the nature of their relationship, and actively harmed her feelings. How valuable is artistic integrity if it is so delicate that news of a relationship around the same time as an album launch could shatter it? And who cares about artistic integrity if your association with someone you care about jeopardizes it? If he cared about her enough to be in a relationship with her, why would it suddenly be such a big threat to his career for him to be associated with her? She's good enough for him in secrecy, but a disaster to him publicly? Make it make sense. Humiliating and dumping her is a punishment for a choice he made. He pursued her. It's like he caught her in a game she didn't ask to play. If the toxic behavior ended here, we could write these couple of months off as a bad run at a doomed relationship. But instead, John keeps pursuing and breaking up with Jessica and employing these identified red flags over and over again, forming a toxic cycle. It's September 2006. John and Jessica rekindle the romance when he shows up in London, and we see red flag number 5. Their relationship was a secret again. 2 months later, he breaks up with her again over email. The cycle of breaking up over email is a bizarre behavior in and of itself. As I previously mentioned, it makes no sense to risk losing a relationship you value. Breaking up and then reinitiating contact is a manipulation tactic to keep the upper hand. John defines when the relationship is over, always in email, but then also gets to decide when it restarts. Jessica explains that sometimes it felt random, and other times she felt like she could foresee the breakup. When they would get back together, he would grill her on who'd she seen and what she'd done. This is another Mr. Right behavior, thinking he knows what's best for her life. Jessica was invited to perform in a tribute to Dolly Parton at the Kennedy Center. The night before, she had planned to go to bed early, but instead she found herself crying on the floor of her hotel room. John broke up with her at 10 p.m. and then sent her an Aerosmith song at 11:20 p.m. She called him, and he didn't answer. The next morning, Jessica drank to calm her nerves and became drunk before her performance. Right before she was to go on stage, John called her back and they had a fight. Jessica Simpson didn't complete her song that night. She left the stage mid-performance. Believe it or not, according to Bancroft, this is another example of John being a Mr. Right. If he's still not satisfied that he has brought her down low enough, he may reach for bigger guns, such as ruining evening plans. In short, Mr. Right finds some way to ensure that his partner regrets her insistence on having her own mind. Performing a Dolly song at a Dolly Parton tribute was a big deal for Jessica Simpson and for her career. John knocked her confidence and self-esteem by sabotaging her performance. Even after the nightmare that was the Dolly Parton tribute concert, they got back together and then broke up after the Grammys. I can't even recall why. I remember knocking on his hotel room door and begging until he finally took me back in the middle of the night. Then they got back together and John love-bombed Jessica with extravagant gestures. He took her to Tiffany & Company and got her a necklace, then Fendi for whatever she wanted. Love bombing is a technique where one person overwhelms the other to win trust and affection. A narcissist may employ love bombing to develop collateral to make their victim think they owe them something. Jessica recognized her discomfort with this tactic as it was happening. The extravagant gestures continued and made my anxiety kick in. The higher he lifted me, the longer the fall would be when I disappointed him, and I knew I would. They broke up again. They got back together again and went to the Met Gala, and then they broke up again. In 2007, Jessica managed to move on with Tony Romo, a football player who's now a broadcaster. John also had some relationships during this time, including Minka Kelly and Jennifer Aniston. Even though Jessica was out of John's life, he didn't completely leave hers. In 2009, John Mayer started hanging out with Jessica's parents. It started under the guise of hanging out with Pete Wentz, Jessica's then brother-in-law. But then it turned into only John Mayer and Jessica's parents spending time together. He emailed her and told her he wanted to get back together, all while her parents told her how earnest he was. He would literally go over to her parents' house with his guitar and play music for them by their fire pit. He insisted that he had changed and needed Jessica back. This is another boundary violation. There's no reason why her ex-boyfriend should have access to her parents while she's in a new relationship. Jessica didn't invite him to become friends with her family. He made the decision to violate her privacy with her parents against her consent. Then he showed up to her birthday party in July 2009 at her parents' house. By a fire in the backyard, he stood and told all of us that he loved me and that we could all trust him to be a good man. Jessica rebuffed him and reminded him she was with Tony. When she went back to Tony, they had a fight and broke up. So Jessica went to John. But now he didn't want to get back together. After that public display at her birthday party in front of her parents, he didn't want to get back together. He played his album Battle Studies and told her over and over again that the songs were about her. She called out other women he dated during that time, and he claimed he couldn't find material to write about them. Remember that for later. They rekindled their relationship. Jessica took time to work on her own creative project, a show called The Price of Beauty. While working on it, both Jessica and John got space from each other. Jessica was cultivating her creative work, and John was promoting his album when he gave 2 interviews that altered the trajectory of his career. After the first interview with the Rolling Stone, Jessica confronted John and received little remorse. The following month, John had an interview run in Playboy that he eventually apologized to Jessica for. She responded and did not forgive him. This was the ultimate end to their relationship. These interviews have unique content and insight to John Mayer. Like my coverage of his background, I'm not going to dive into every word, but instead highlight parts that are representative of the larger story. In both instances, the interviewers prop John up as an intellectual type, something that Jessica Simpson seems to also believe about John. I've never met John Mayer, but I've met smart people. I know people who graduated from Harvard, both undergrad and Harvard Law. One of my brothers went to an Ivy League grad school, and those are just a few of the academically accomplished people in my life. I also know intelligent people who didn't complete higher education and instead focused on creative pursuits. So while I don't know John, I know enough academically accomplished and self-motivated intellectual people to know that people who build their personality around being perceived as smart can be insufferable. The interviewers call him intellectual, but then provide no evidence of intelligent conversation. He rants about how it was easier for him to sleep with women before being famous than it is now that he's famous. He talks about masturbation and poop jokes. These topics can be made interesting with innovative insight, but that's not what John brings to the table. He talks about what he wants to talk about because he wants to hear himself talking about it, not because he has anything interesting to say. John seems to lack the self-awareness to recognize that just because the interviewer is actively listening and prodding for more doesn't mean that what he is saying is profound. In both instances, the interviewers likely saw John going on irreverent and jarring tangents and saw money signs going off in their head that de-incentivized course-correcting the conversation. It's not like they didn't stop him because he was uncovering profound realizations. They didn't stop him because he lacked the boundaries to maintain his professional facade. He behaved as though he was above social norms and therefore could disregard them. In the Rolling Stone interview, John was unfiltered about his relationships or lack thereof. John laments the difficulty in sleeping with new partners because he can't fathom explaining myself to somebody who can't believe I'd be interested in them. He then goes on to explain that he thinks he will have to meet someone who he admires more than himself in order to get right for a relationship. And that person must have 2 things. They can go toe-to-toe with him intellectually, which he seems to think is a tall order. And she must also have female genitalia that is exceptional. He wants it to be so exceptional that he could pitch a tent on and just camp out on for like a weekend. Doesn't that have to be there too? The Joshua tree of female genitalia? Reading this interview is incredibly painful. It makes me think to myself, Wow, this is what Jessica Simpson was getting intellectually tormented by. A guy who goes on poop and self-pleasuring rants to a journalist when he should be promoting an album. The interviewer, Eric Hedegaard, corroborates Jessica beautifully. John's on a real roll right now, caught up again in the workings of his own mind. At times like these, it's impossible to get a word in edgewise. It seems dangerous to even try. It's best just to let him go on. Even when interviewing, John doesn't start to have an equal conversation or exchange of ideas. He discusses Jennifer Aniston, who he also dated leading up to the album Battle Study's release. Like Jessica experienced in their early relationship, he props Jennifer up on a pedestal. After he ended his relationship with Jennifer, John held a sort of press conference to explain the breakup. During this press conference, he declared, "I'm the asshole. I burned the American flag. I basically murdered an ideal." The concept here is that he's taking the blame for the breakup and equates her to the American flag. But she isn't an ideal or symbol for America. She's a person, and describing their relationship in those terms is dehumanizing. He puts forth this image of her where she isn't a person. She's above personhood. Maybe he thinks this is flattering, but propping her on a pedestal is employed as triangulation technology again in the next interview, so we'll revisit this. Most of the Rolling Stone article is gross and mind-numbingly boring, so on to the next article. While the Playboy interview is as droll as the Rolling Stone interview, this one includes a racist slur, propping Jennifer on a pedestal, and deeply insulting Jessica Simpson. I believe it would be inexcusable for me to talk about this interview and not mention the racism. The negative backlash from this article came from his descriptions of his relationship with the Black community and not his comments on his ex-girlfriends. The New York Times has published several articles about the backlash and John's regrets over these statements. While John usually rambles irreverently on inconsequential topics, this delicate subject matter is met with especially clumsy handling. However, the depth it would take to explain why he shouldn't have said these things could take another 15 minutes to cover. I can't adequately describe these offenses in one video. So instead, I'll mention what they were and briefly summarize some of the problematic nature related to these statements. I recommend researching and educating yourself on these statements if you don't quite understand how they're offensive. John declared that Black people love me, which is a generally dehumanizing statement that presumes Black people are a hive mind that make unilateral decisions on pop stars and whether or not they are beloved. Then John spoke about having a hood pass and the contradiction of him claiming to have one and how if he did have one, he could call it an N-word pass. But he used the racial slur itself, not the phrase, the N-word. After this interview published, John tweeted an apology of sorts where he said, "I'm sorry that I used the word, and it's such a shame that I did because the point I was trying to make was in the exact opposite spirit of the word itself. It was arrogant of me to think I could intellectualize using it because I realized there's no intellectualizing a word that is so emotionally charged." The claim that John was trying to intellectualize the word and that can't be done because of how emotionally charged it is such an insulting non-apology. There's no evidence that John has any understanding of the lexicology of the word or of any word ever. There's no evidence that John has done any work to better understand the Black experience or how he could use his words and language as an ally. Claiming that emotional charge is the problem and not his own lack of due diligence to understand the word he's trying to reclaim is alone evidence of his lack of familiarity with the scholarship surrounding the word. By the way, emotional intelligence is intelligence. It's not good business acumen to go on the record using a historically racist slur that is socially unacceptable to use. There literally isn't a smart way to use that word in this interview. It was unintelligent. He did a dumb thing. When asked if Black women are attracted to him, he says he doesn't open himself up for it. "My male genitalia is sort of like a white supremacist. I've got a Benetton heart and a freaking David Duke genitalia." Who is David Duke? Straight from Wikipedia, David Duke is an American neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic conspiracy theorist, far-right politician, convicted felon, and former Grand Wizard of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. I had to look up the Benetton reference. I think he's mentioning the United Colors of Benetton, which is an apparel company that famously features models of different races in its catalogs. I don't think I really need to explain why John referring to his reproductive organs as the leader of the KKK is a bad idea or disgusting, so I'm going to tap out of this explanation and let you use your imagination. These are by no means all of the offensive racist statements John Mayer made, but they paint a picture of how unaware John was of racial inequity in the United States. If he made these statements in 2021, I believe his career would be over indefinitely. But in 2010, it only put his career on hold for a couple of months. After that tirade of racist word vomit, he brings the topic back to the reason he's shopping around the press right now, the launch of his album. John wraps up his paragraph about specific Black women by explaining that heartbreak warfare is about a girl using jealousy as a tactic. Because the public thinks that Jennifer Aniston, his most recent public ex, may be his muse, Tannenbaum asks if she inspired heartbreak warfare, and John jumps to her defense. That woman would never use heartbreak warfare. That woman was the most communicative, sweetest, kindest person. When people hear the record, I hope the songs make them think about their lives, not my life. This is that same proper up on a pedestal move that John first broke out in the Rolling Stone. On its own, it's unflattering to Jennifer, but in this instance, it's used in a weird way. It contributes to a dichotomy between Jennifer and Jessica. The conversation now shifts to Jessica, and then back to Jennifer. The tone and language difference between these descriptions of these women could not be more opposite. Tannenbaum brings up Jessica, and that John had to know when he started dating her, the paparazzi was going to follow. John responds by saying that the value judgment wasn't about the paparazzi, but instead about sleeping with Jessica. I really said, I now make the choice to sleep with Jessica Simpson. That was stronger than my desire to stay out of the paparazzi's eye. That girl, for me, is a drug. And drugs aren't good for you if you do lots of them. Yeah, that girl is like crack cocaine to me. Tannenbaum asks if John was addicted to Jessica, and he compares her to napalm. It was like napalm, sexual napalm. Tannenbaum clarifies that before dating her, John didn't think of himself as the kind of guy who would ever date Jessica Simpson, and John agrees. There are people in the world who have the power to change our values. Have you ever been with a girl who made you want to quit the rest of your life? Did you ever say, I want to quit my life and just snort you? If you charge me $10,000 to be intimate with you, I would start selling all my stuff just to keep sleeping with you. I'm not really sure what values John had that he had to change in order to pursue a relationship with Jessica. If this is that same argument about artistic integrity that led him to dump her in the first place, I once again question the validity of any artistic integrity that is that delicate. Additionally, she wasn't the last pop singer that he ever dated. He wants to have it both ways. He wants to have access to Jessica and the ability to have a relationship with her, but he also wants to trash talk her in public. Because she's a ditzy pop singer? Why do that to her? Why present this image that she's below him? Jessica was marketed as a pure, virginal being in her early career. She's a woman of faith, and pop culture frequently correlates faith with chastity. By diminishing their relationship to only sex, not only is he dehumanizing her, but he is also smearing her public image. Jessica is a public figure with a very successful business. That means she frequently interacts with the press. John reducing her personhood and commenting on her sexuality like this doesn't exist in a chamber. She will have to answer to his statements for the rest of her very successful career. But then we get the triangulation. John cuts in and decides that he can't talk about Jessica because he's apparently still shopping around the I feel bad for breaking up with Jennifer story. I love Jen so much that now I'm thinking about how bad I would feel if she read this and was like, why are you putting me in an article where you're talking about someone else? I don't want to be in your lineage of kiss and tells. There's nothing wrong with comparing sex with Jessica Simpson to napalm, but it is wrong to talk about Jessica when talking about Jennifer. The implication is that Jessica is such a lower being that mentioning her in the same interview as Jennifer insults Jennifer. Dropping a racial slur is okay, but the moment you start talking about Jessica Simpson, that is an insult. I could not imagine a clearer way to signal that John considers Jessica to be trash and Jennifer to be worthy of love. Jessica was good enough for him to spend a fair part of 2006 through 2010 pining over, but she's not good enough to be respected. That right there is textbook triangulation. Thanks. I hate it. There's something I left out while covering Jessica's love story with John that is crucial to the full story. Around the time John was hanging out with Jessica's parents in early 2009, he tweeted about wanting to do a duet with Taylor Swift. Before Jessica broke up with Tony Romo, John had begun some sort of relationship with Taylor Swift. In May 2009, John showed up on stage to perform at a Taylor Swift concert. Then in June, John releases a version of Half of My Heart featuring Taylor. In July, John showed up at Jessica's birthday party to plead for her to take him back. They rekindled their romance, but once again on uncertain, non-public terms. Jessica began traveling and filming The Price of Beauty around September 2009, and John is rumored to have started romantically dating Taylor Swift in November/December-ish that year. When the Rolling Stone interview was published in January 2010, Jessica called John out on sleeping with multiple people. Jessica was one of those people, and if John and Taylor were involved from the end of 2009 through February 2010, that means he could have been sleeping with both of them at the same time. I've never heard any coverage that lines that up. I kind of feel like Jessica Simpson broke this in her memoir and nobody put the pieces together. Taylor and Jessica may have been unknowingly involved with John at the same time, and for the rest of this video, I am going to presuppose that they were. He was publicly associating with Taylor Swift, but privately having an intimate relationship with Jessica. We don't know if Taylor knew he was still seeing Jessica. Maybe he told her. Maybe he didn't. This also means that Taylor Swift was involved with John Mayer when both interviews were released and got to read the insulting, degrading testimonies he provided. Maybe it was a gift. She got a glimpse into the future that could be if they had a very public romance. She would eventually be either trash or too good for him. Either way, their relationship ended. Taylor Swift was born in 1989. She will be 32 in December 2021. She was 16 when her debut album was released. This album has since been certified platinum 7 times. When John tweeted about wanting to collaborate with Taylor Swift in March 2009, the most recent album she had released was Fearless in November 2008. At the time they were rumored to be dating in November 2009, Taylor Swift was 19 and John Mayer was 32. I'll talk more about that later. Unfortunately, Taylor Swift hasn't released a memoir yet, so we don't know as much detail about her relationship with John as we know about Jessica Simpson's. But if there's one thing Taylor Swift is known for, it's writing songs about exes. The 5th track on Taylor's 3rd album, Speak Now, released in October 2010, is called Dear John. This album came out 9 months after their supposed breakup, which was also 9 months after the Playboy Interview. To be honest, I'd never intentionally listened to this song until I was working on this video. I had a general idea of the lyrics, and there are ones that plainly sync up with the story of their relationship, but when you add the added context of Jessica's testimony, it seems obvious that this song is about John Mayer. The clearest reference to John Mayer is the mention of the age gap. The chorus asks, "Don't you think I was too young to be messed with?" And then later in the song she asks, "Don't you think 19's too young?" John Mayer is 13 years older than Taylor, and she was 19 when they first started dating. Her next relationship with Jake Gyllenhaal also had a large age gap, but that relationship started right before this album released, and she would have been almost 20 at that point, so we can eliminate Jake from the lineup. The next most damning line is, "And I look back and regret how I ignored when they said, 'Run as fast as you can.'" By the time Taylor had started fraternizing with John Mayer, he already had a past of high-profile on-again, off-again relationships, not only with Jessica Simpson and Jennifer Aniston, but with Cameron Diaz, Minka Kelly, and Jennifer Love Hewitt. I don't know about you, but when I see the headline, "John Mayer spotted with," enter female celebrity name here, I groan. I remember yelling when I saw that Katy Perry was dating him. This is where we stop lining up the lyrics with what we know of their relationship and start comparing the behaviors in this song to the record Jessica Simpson gave of their relationship. If John has a pattern of being toxic in one relationship, could we find proof of that same toxic behavior in another relationship? Maybe it's you and your sick need to give love and take it away. If Jessica wrote this lyric, I would say, Yeah, he was always breaking up with and getting back together with her. That was his pattern of operation. The song opens describing the turmoil of being in a roller coaster relationship. Long were the nights when my days once revolved around you, counting my footsteps, praying through the floor won't fall through again. Jessica could have written the same story. Remember that time John broke up with her in the middle of the night and kicked her out of the hotel room? Or the text she would have her friends proofread? Of all the lines in the song, to me, these are some of the most damning. You are an expert at sorry and keeping lines blurry. Isn't that a very succinct description of both Jessica's entire relationship to John, but also the likely method of the undoing of Taylor and John's relationship? I mean, did Taylor know that John was involved with Jessica when they were together? Was their togetherness ever defined in a way that was satisfactory for Taylor? Isn't it possible that she was led into a relationship that she thought was one thing, but then discovered it was another? And then when she tried to hold him accountable, isn't it likely that the relationship broke? And if the relationship broke because its terms were unclear, isn't it possible that an apology from John would be enough to rekindle it while dodging the accountability to define it? Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions and reading into it too much, but the line of reasoning aligns with John's pattern of behavior from Jessica's relationship with John. But aren't I making a mighty big assumption that this song is about John Mayer? Yeah, the timeline and described behaviors line up, but what does Taylor say? She hasn't explicitly confirmed that this song is about John Mayer. When asked by People magazine, she said, "A lot of times when people's relationships end, they write an email to that person and say everything that they wish they would have said. A lot of times they don't push send." I don't know about you, but I don't send a lot of breakup emails. But I know that John Mayer employs delayed conversation tactics like texting and email in his relationships, at least the one he had with Jessica Simpson. Referencing a post-breakup email in this way really signals John Mayer. But maybe this is a normal thing for celebrity relationships in 2010? While promoting the album, Taylor told Yahoo Music that every single song is like a roadmap to what that relationship stood for. And every single song is like that. Everyone will know, so I don't really have to send out emails on this one. The insinuation that everyone in the relationship or involved will know which song is about who makes me believe that the trademark John behavior was in fact John Mayer's behavior. And then there was John Mayer's reaction. In the Rolling Stone, because he still talks to them, he says he was really humiliated by Dear John and it made him feel terrible. But that's not enough. He takes a dig at Taylor Swift as a musician. I will say as a songwriter that I think it's kind of cheap songwriting. I know she's the biggest thing in the world, and I'm not trying to sink anybody's ship, but I think it's abusing your talent to rub your hands together and go, wait till he gets a load of this. That's BS. Remember before when John Mayer played the Battle Studies album for Jessica and told her which songs were about her? Or when he told Playboy that Heartbreak Warfare wasn't about Jennifer Aniston? How is this any different? Is it because it's happening to him instead of to a woman he's trying to hurt? What exactly about this song is so humiliating? In the Rolling Stone interview, he said to set aside the topic of age difference. I will not be overlooking the age gap because I find it disgusting and unethical. Taylor was 19 and John was 32 when they started their relationship. Before John, her most recent boyfriend was Taylor Lautner, who was 2 years younger than her. Before Lucas Till, 1 year younger than her. Joe Jonas was the only preceding boyfriend to Lucas, and he was the same age as Taylor. She hadn't had experience with a partner 5 years older than her, let alone 13 years. If you're in the camp that thinks the age gap at these ages is appropriate, I'm sure I won't be convincing you otherwise today, and I'm not going to try. You either recognize that the gap in life experience contributes to a disturbing power imbalance, or you don't. In my mind, just because something is legal doesn't make it ethical, and I think that this is inexcusable. I think John Mayer deserved every word in that song, and that we should question his character. The Swifties on TikTok are questioning his character. Since working on this video, John Mayer has entered popular conversation again in a big way. First with comments about Britney Spears on Andy Cohen's show, then by starting a TikTok account. The Swifties aren't into it, and I think they're fighting the good fight. John Mayer is a 43-year-old man. What is he doing on TikTok? Trolling for 19-year-olds? 2 instances don't make a pattern. So let's see if I can loop in another one of John's exes into a system that we've set up. Good news, if you type in Katy Perry, John Mayer into Google search, the top result tells you that the two had an off and on again relationship where they broke up in August 2012, March 2013, and February 2014. Katy hasn't said much about John, and it looks like we may have to wait for another memoir for that one. But that very much looks like the fingerprints of the old breakup and get back together again game that John likes to play. Now, it is possible that their relationship was positive, and that John has had positive relationships, or that even in the relationships mentioned, that both parties were toxic and only his behavior is being reported on. It's also likely that there were more negative experiences by more people than have spoken up, and that those experiences are being kept private because when you're a celebrity, your privacy is a commodity, and the only way to completely control it is to hold it in. For those of you who don't know, the New York Times recently released a documentary about Britney Spears' court-sanctioned conservatorship called Framing Britney Spears. The documentary follows Britney's rise to stardom, struggle with public life, and then forced conservatorship by her previously estranged father. I am a longtime Britney fan and wore a Britney costume to my work's Halloween party in 2019. I've followed the story for a few years and couldn't believe the audacity of John Mayer to speak on the story as if his empathy was worth anything more than lip service. John Mayer watched the documentary about Britney Spears' conservatorship and had this to say: "I almost cried 5 times during that. I mean, I was on the edge of tears 5 times because if you understand what this business, industry, lifestyle does to a person, to go through this and come out on the other side okay is to have infinite grace for those who struggle with it." Is that what John called breaking up with Jessica Simpson the night before the Dolly Parton tribute concert? Infinite grace for a person struggling with the pressure of the spotlight? Or is that what he called sleeping with Jessica and Taylor at the same time while being publicly spotted with one but not the other? Infinite grace and understanding for what the celebrity lifestyle does to a person? His other comments went on to say that he has a very strong feeling that a lot of these things that happen to female performers is endemic to being female. But what about a male performer's role in how female performers are treated? What about how John Mayer treated Jessica Simpson or Taylor Swift? Was his toxicity in those relationships endemic to his partners being female performers? Or is John Mayer responsible for his actions? John Mayer has never met Britney Spears. His claim that it was the industry and not controlling behavior within interpersonal relationships that make her worthy of compassion to the point of almost crying 5 times explains why he could be a total jerk to Taylor Swift and Jessica Simpson and not see himself as a hypocrite. If it's the industry that hurt Britney Spears, men like him can't be held responsible for what they do in their relationships. I wasn't the only person to identify the hypocrisy of John Mayer sympathizing with Britney while having harmed his own romantic partners, but this is another thing Lundy Bancroft talks about in his book. Just because John Mayer treated his partners poorly doesn't mean he would identify with persons treating others poorly. The behaviors may not equate in his eyes the same way they do to a spectator. While making this video, I have heard John Mayer songs on the radio. Now, I'm not saying that he shouldn't be part of the cultural zeitgeist and that his music shouldn't be on the radio. I'm saying that informed consumption relies on public awareness. If you choose to consume John Mayer's content knowing how he treated his romantic partners, that's up to you. But when I connected the dots, I was turned off by how much it reflected stories from my life and friends' lives. I don't want to support a man who behaves like John Mayer does. I had this feeling of, why doesn't anyone talk about this? So yeah, I talked about it.